Hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. So nice to have you with us. We're coming to you on a sunny day here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. And we come together like this once every 2 weeks from the Arlington Institute to talk about some major kind of issue that's kind of underpins the huge kind of change that we're seeing around us. We're going to talk today about reality and truth and the existence of truth. And so stay tuned because you'll like it. Penny Kelly, how are you today?
I'm great. Good to be here. Hi, Greg. Hi, Kingsley. And hello to everybody out there.
Yeah, Kingsley Dennis, how are you?
Hello, John, everyone, and everyone tuning in. It's good to be back with you again in the quartet.
And Gregg Braden, how are you, sir?
I am beyond epic today. It's a beautiful day. I'm happy to be with you all, and I'm excited about this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, it's really going to be fun because this is kind of central to making sense out of what's going to happen in the coming months and years. So it's time for our topic of the day. One of the things that we have talked about in the past is the whole notion of kind of reality and how can you tell what's real or what isn't kind of real. And that has kind of in the context of what we've talked about, it's kind of got a technology patina to it, that there's all these mechanisms that we can use to kind of change things on the fly on a day-to-day basis. But there's a deeper issue and a really quite fundamental one to this transition to this new world, this implosion of the old system and the emergence of a new one. That process kind of by definition means that all of those things that you understood, the way things worked and so on in the old system are coming apart, unglued, imploding. And what emerges is a new framework, a new paradigmatic framework that gives you a new framework for being able to understand how reality works or how you think reality works. It's an internally consistent kind of mechanism for keeping you kind of sane, literally, because if you've got a world where nothing works or you don't know how it works, then you're kind of crazy because you have no stability. And so when you go through a period of time like this, a transition where one kind of paradigm is collapsing and another one is emerging, then what you've got is Orwellian world, right? I try to a mutual friend of Greg's and mine used to tell me, read 1984 every year, go back and read it every year and remind yourself about what this is about. Because when you read Orwell and you read 1984, you keep nodding your head saying, yeah, that's what's happening. That's what they're doing, and it's amazingly predictive. But there's a kind of a deeper kind of issue here, and that is how do we know what is true or not? Some folks, perhaps some of you, will tell me, well, it's obvious how you know what's true, and you're going to tell me how, and I would be happy to listen to that. But what I can tell you is that almost everywhere you look for truth or determined truth, you've got an underlying kind of system or a process that is subjective. I was reminded originally by Robert Anton Wilson, who was a famous writer from back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, who spent 3 years in his life systematically exploring 3 different vectors to try to understand how reality worked, really. So he did drugs and everything in drugs that you could think about. And it was a systematic attempt. It was not just for fun. It was to try to expose, you go out there and see what was out there. and how it worked. And then he did the occult kind of things with Aleister Crowley and all of that, and those kinds of folks. And he did another one, and I think it was the kind of new agey thing, I guess. What is truth? Well, truth is kind of whatever you want it to be. Has some sense of subjectivity. And that, you go to the guys like Neville Goddard, and Neville Goddard will essentially convince you that you can generate anything that you want and you can make any reality that you want. So our question then is, so what is truth relative? Is there a way that you can really clearly, definitively identify what is true and not? And to the extent that it is malleable, to the extent that it's fluid, then what do you do? Let's start with you, Kingsley. What do you think about that?
Thank you, John. Yes, well, I could say that truth or reality is right where you are sitting right now. That's what I think Robert Anton Wilson kind of concluded. Yes, in fact, I was remembering, the question of what is truth and is it relative? Well, I would say straight off the bat, yes, truth is relative. Because you have to think about where is the domain, the context of what we're talking about is truth. So, some of us may say, well, there's only one truth with a capital T, and that belongs to the divine, the source, the absolute, the God, if you wish to, whatever name you wish to call it. But you see, wherever the absolute is, the absolute exists outside the domain of our reality construct. So that's a truth which is not a part of our experiential reality. So I often refer to this reality as the lesser reality, as opposed to the greater reality. So within the lesser reality, which is our construct, everything is going to be relative or subjective. That's the nature of this participatory reality. And for me, that includes even the universe. Even the universe as we know it is a part of our construct. So if and when we meet other intelligences in this universe, then again, we may be dealing with relative truths. But if they come into our reality construct, it's a different matter. What are they bringing in? What is the truth? Like gravity. Well, the gravity, we can say, is only a law for this particular universe. So if we go into another dimension, it's very likely we're going to come across different laws. So therefore, it again shows you that even though we believe it's a truth or being told a truth, it's only relative to our domain. So everything's in flux. And I think the famous story that we're all aware of is Plato's cave. And I think that's a very good analogy that tried to show us in a very simple way that what we're seeing are projections of a greater reality that comes to us as shadows. And we have this again in like the imaginal realm, that Plato was saying that there's a realm of pure form, pure ideas. What we get are the secondary ideas. And so, but of course, we're not taught that. And so we're already in a land of confusion. And I think so that's the kind of the bigger picture, John. And humanity's been dealing that from day one. I think day one, we've always been trying to reach the truth. That science, the church told us that, the truth was only the religious truth. And then science came along and told us that the earth is the center of the universe. And then that got contested by scientists. And then again, you have all these contestations and much bloodshed. So we've always been trying to deal with that. For me, I would say that reality corresponds to the limitations of our cognitive perception. And at each stage of the journey, I think one of the purposes that drives development and drives evolution is that we're forever expanding the limitations of our perceptive or our cognitive perception. Yeah. And as we expand that, then a greater truth and reality opens up to us. And it's by pushing those boundaries that we take the next iteration, the next step. And it seems to me that that's built into our reality. We're supposed to question the truth, not accept it. And it's by questioning the truth and finding the flaws and finding new kind of paradigms of truth that pushes forward. So, and I think, and again, you mentioned it, you're spot on, John. You're saying that at these times of, let's say, transition, or I like to call it the threshold, it's when the old order of truth break down. And it's like like the bardo times that the Buddhists say, the liminal zone, the bardo time, because you've moved from one realm and you haven't yet entered the other realm. And so that middle realm is very fluid, it's very uncertain, and the new order of reality or truth hasn't yet become fixed in any way. And I think that's a very kind of time when people are frustrated, and it's a time of much manipulation, because then people want to put forward narratives that they can control around the truth. And as you said, if they can put some aspects of truth to it, but it still has mistruths, we'll often take the aspects of truth and go with that. And I think what's particularly problematic now with these lesser reality and lesser truth is that it feels like there's an artificial path and an organic path. And that's why the human body is so important, because I feel that there's a contact from our realm, our physical body, outside of our reality construct. And the signals that we receive, we can receive them through our bodily construct. So I think if you're saying, how can we recognize the truth and discern it from these artificial cover-ups of the truth and the mechanization and the breakdown, is we have to go through something very innate, very bodily, very essential. And that's why the artificial path is so dangerous, because if they take away the capacity of bodily sensation and a sensate reaction to greater truth, then we are going to lose an ability to even connect with the essence, the flavor of truth. It's like the apple. You can't describe to other people the flavor of the apple, but you know the flavor. And that's, I think, what our greater truths are like. So I think it's a very disconcerting time, because the artificial mechanisms are trying to take us away from the bodily, innate grasp to the truth. But at the moment, there are no greater truths, John. Until they start to come in, our perception, cognitive perception, will be expanded, and that will set us up for, I think, what we don't know that's going to start coming in. I think I'll leave it there.
That's very interesting. You've raised a couple of really poignant kind of points there. One of them is this juxtaposition between the artificial and the natural. Greg, what do you think?
Kingsley, thank you for laying the foundation for this conversation in the beautiful way that you always do. John, and I want to thank you for this topic, because I think it goes right to the core of everything we're seeing unfold in our lives, Dave, from I'm going to call them riots on the college campuses to the war that's focused now in the Middle East. I did a little experiment that I often do before we do one of these. I wanted you ask a question, and I wanted to see what the accepted definition of truth is. So I went to a few different sources, and all of them, John, do something that I was told you cannot do in a definition, and that is use the word that you're trying to define in the definition. So when we start talking about truth, I agree with you, Kingsley, 100%. There are many truths, because there are many worlds, and we have the ability to influence our reality in so many ways. So now we have to refine this question a little bit. What reality are we talking about? And we live in what I like to think of as a consensus reality. We've agreed that there are certain things that we want to be present so that we can live our lives in certain ways. And so that within that reality that we have agreed to, within our consensus reality, there are objective truths in this time-space continuum. For example, if you go to the periodic table of elements, there are elements that are going to have demonstrable and repeatable and verifiable characteristics. Those are objective truths. Where we're getting into trouble is when it comes to relativism and relativistic truths. So what we're being told, and this is, the New Age movement, this is one of the reasons I'm often associated with the New Age movement because of the publisher that I was with. But people that understood my work knew that I actually pushed back on much of the philosophy of the New Age movement. And this is a big part of the reason, because in New Age, people were taught that they can live whatever their own truth is, their own relative truth. And that means that you've got your own relative reality. Well, here's the problem with that. If we all have our own truth that we live in within our own reality, and it is not part of our consensus reality, it becomes impossible to communicate with someone else because they are in their own truth within their own reality. So the question becomes, what kind of reality do we want to live in? And if we want to live in a functional society, there are consensus realities and there are objective truths within those consensus realities. If we want a functional society, if we want functional communities, if we want to cooperate and work together in the ways that we have done in the past that we know is possible, then we agree upon this consensus reality that we're in. And within that consensus reality, there are things that must be objective truths. Penny, I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. What's your feeling?
Well, I wasn't going to bring in anything about aliens, but I will say that my information comes from them. So let me just say, I agree. I think all of you have mentioned this is, this whole question about what's true and what's really true and truly true. I agree that it's because of the paradigm change that we're going through that we have to examine this whole question. And I often tell my students, take your religion and set it aside for a while and learn how reality really works, and then go back and get your religion, if that's important to you, and see where the truths, the things that fit, if you want to use truths, the realities that you like, that you value, those are your truths. And you can fit that in here and there. Some of that religion you might not embrace anymore. Some of it you might say is, it's absolutely right on. And I'm going to hang on to that. But there's a whole lot of change that's happening right now that I get really excited about. About thinking, about assessing. As I see what's coming, I'm going, oh my gosh. Oh yeah, I am so excited at times. And it's slow and it's messy. Yeah. And we are losing a lot of truth, but I think we are gaining a lot in terms of value, in terms of understanding, and in terms of what's real.
John, I think that this is the key to maybe consensus reality isn't the best word. That's the word I'm using right now, but it's what we agree to. The fundamentals are what we agree to, the values that we cherish as a species. If we cherish the value and the sanctity of life, then that becomes a value that is part of that reality. That's a part of what Penny is talking about. The truth is that I don't think anyone knows what really happened in Israel on October 7th, because all of our information is coming through the filters of whatever news source, whatever media that is. There are objective realities. There are people that are dead. And that is an objective reality. Now, the motivation that took those lives, that can be a relative truth. It comes from different perspectives of different people. And this is where these things clash, is the motivation based on relativism and the objective outcome. The life is lost. So I think there are values that we all have to come to terms with, and that's uncomfortable. But a lot of my friends don't like to do this because they get shamed in their social media, they get shunned, they get criticized. But we have to come to terms with what it is that we value, what do we cherish about our lives together in this reality, whatever we want to call it, for now, for this time, knowing that that will change, but for right now. And I think that's how we move through the time, because if you don't do that, John, what happens is all the incoming is a big mishmash. But if you've got objective values that you cherish that become the foundation, now you've got a line in the sand. You've got a foundation that now you can build other policies and principles and lifestyle choices around, at least for that moment in time, knowing that they're going to change.
So you're kind of looking for what works, right? Is that that's what it sounds like.
Well, this goes back to Kingsley. What aligns with what feels, what does it feel like in the body, which can be relative, but we have an innate sense of fundamental good and evil. We know that, and that is we're wired for dark and light, good and evil.
Doesn't that change different places in the world?
I don't think that our relationship to good and evil changes. I think that society and the people who are manipulating us are trying to show us some wiggle room, getting us to normalize and accept what we fundamentally know and we sense is not good for us. It's not healthy. It's not true in our lives. I think we know those things. That's my experience, my sense.
You're right. The definitions of good and evil may change because there are external references. And I think what we're talking about here is that these external reference points, I mean, usually, as you say, Greg, the consensus reality, we agree to have terms of reference that are in common. And that helps us to socially organize and be, in collaboration and to get things done. And they are outsourced terms of reference. And now that those terms of reference are all dropping, they're dissolving, they're being manipulated, and it's getting very confusing, then I think the place of shelter has to be not outsourcing our references, but insourcing them. Because this is a thing which with institutions and institutional religion has done, and I think Penny touched upon it, is what they did is they wanted to take people away from direct experience and direct perception of their truths. So what you do, you say, well, you can't experience God, but we'll put the broker, the middle person, to translate for you, and that's the narrative of God. So people got used to not using the capacity of direct perception, direct intuition. And there is something we have, and I think that's called conscience. We have a conscience, and those people who act against their conscience are acting incorrectly. Some people don't have a conscience, and they're psychopaths because they've completely lost the connection. So in these times, I feel that we have to start to go in and go back home into ourselves, because if we go out, we're going to be debating about your identity, this identity, because that's been deliberately broken down. Political, sexual, social, cultural identities are up for grabs right now. So we have to go into the conscience and the inner terms of reference and hold that ground, hold that vibration until again some new terms of reference come in that we can socially start to kind of discern which is correct for the way we've been.
I just have to add this. We are wired. The hypothalamus is considered to be the brain of the brain. That hypothalamus is only capable of two kinds of reactions. One is a reaction to pleasure. The other is pain. If you take the terms good and bad, or evil and, good and evil, you can say that we are wired to recognize what will further life, and that's good, and what will interfere with life, and that's bad, that's evil. And then there's a whole bunch of, there's 5 million different iterations and variations in that, in those two things. But what does that say about us? Getting back to fundamentals, what is the fundamental truth of the human truth? The fundamental truth of the human is that we are wired to unfold into greater consciousness, greater power, greater wisdom, etc. That mechanism in the brain is there for exactly that. That if we just took that into account, that would be a huge fundamental change, along with valuing life and, all the other things we've been talking about. That's a change in how we see ourselves, and therefore how we set up all of those systems, whether it's government, agriculture, medicine, science, tech, business, whatever. That we have to have a different set of fundamentals that we consider to be absolutely true or valuable and worth reaching for. And then we will be able to come to a new consensus about what are we doing here?
Based on, and Penny, and what you're saying then, the guidelines, when we're presented with something in life brings something to our doorstep. Maybe it's an election. It could be an election. And rather than looking at people, you look at the principles, and the principles that you're talking about are principles of expansion. Who supports expansion rather than contraction? Who supports freedom rather than control? Who supports expression and innovation and imagination and creativity rather than, follow the rules and rote learning? Those kinds of principles, if I'm understanding you, are what we're wired as humans to. That's what allows us to thrive.
This has been a fascinating and interesting discussion, and I appreciate all the comments from all three of you. And thank you for coming and being with us. We come from the Arlington Institute, a little think tank that I started over 35 years ago. We really appreciate you being with us.